So welcome everybody to the workshop about the addressable customer experience in travel that Merkel will provide. My name is Jesus Salgado. I'm Focusrite analyst for Spain and Latin America. And please welcome Matt Nager, Andrew Hoebricht, and Shirley Seltzer.
Thank you. Is this on? Great. Okay, well, apparently we are sitting here between you guys and lunch, which is right after this. So hopefully we can keep you guys entertained. Thank you for coming out. I am Andrew Hoebricht. I run the travel, media, and entertainment vertical within our company. And Matt Nager is will be coming up shortly, is an integrated strategy lead for digital. Within that industry, and Shirley Seltzer is our analytics lead for travel, media, entertainment as well. Is this connected to? There we go. Good. So today we wanted to talk to you guys about the idea of disruption is obviously a theme of the conference. For us, we see in the travel industry a really interesting application of what we call the addressable customer experience. We're going to talk a bit more about what that means and the opportunity that all the businesses within the travel industry have an opportunity to take advantage of. And the first thing we wanted to hit was just a couple of key trends that we see. Obviously, the theme around travel is important to put a context around our conversation today. These are some of the key pillars that we've been noticing for 2015 and beyond. The first one in terms of technical driven innovation. I'm sure many of you are feeling that yourselves, but you think about what brands are doing today in driving kind of a sense of innovation and building stronger relationships with their customers. The impact, from our perspective, is obviously extensive amounts of data, increases in information to manage, and Merkel's been in the business of managing customer information for a very long time, and it's only getting more complex as these sorts of innovations are hitting the market. You think about My Magic Plus, the Disney Parks and Resorts. You think about sort of this idea around remote check-in on the mobile device. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of managing an event stream of information and having that contained at an individual level so that we can create more customized and personalized experiences for those guests. On the second one, content marketing, really critical. More and more consumers are kind of have an expectation to be spoken to in a very relevant way. They don't want to be sold to. They want to be inspired and engaged. I think that's even more important, obviously, in the travel sector. A lot of these decisions to make travel are very, not always pragmatic. There's an emotional side of how these decisions are made. And today, not only are we going to talk about the importance of how to connect with people in this new world where there's multi-device, multi-channel media consumption, very distracted consumer. Not only going to talk about how we can enable you to connect with those consumers and manage the new complexity, but it's also important to be delivering the right message. So whether that's in the form of content or sequential messaging or telling a story across devices is really critical so that we can, we can't drop the ball on delivering the right story. On the third one, obviously mobile. It feels like every year is the year of mobile for the last many years. I think now we're certainly at a point of inflection. I think within the travel industry, again, one of the, travel in and of itself is really defined by, being mobile, right, to some degree. So, much of the work that we're involved in, we see this becoming more and more a critical piece of the puzzle, and that consumers' experiences are going to be moving primarily, that brand experience is primarily going to be moving to the mobile device. When you think about the idea of remote check-in is a great example. People actually ordering food to their room before they get there, keyless entry, checking in through the device. It's going to become a much bigger piece. So another implication to that is, again, how we manage that cross-device relationship with the consumer when mobile becomes such a primary component of that. And then the fourth one is kind of rolling all this in together is really around personalization. We're really entering an era now. I think, again, this is another one where personalization has been talked about for quite a while, but the complexity of actually delivering on that has been increasing. But now I think there is this expectation to be able to connect relevantly, make the messages specific. Many of the travel brands that we work with have tiered products and services, so we've got to make sure that we're laddering people up into the right product based on who they are. Segmentation analytics is critical to being able to do that, but then again, also delivering across our infrastructure to communicate that properly. So the team is going to talk a little bit more about how we bring this together and what the implications of these trends are as it relates to the addressable experience.
Yeah, and I think as Andrew was indicating, a lot of things are changing in this space. In particular, as we look at this slide, I've been to a number of sessions already today, and everybody's talking about the advent and what's happening with programmatic buying, where new players are coming at in the marketplace to start to create the ability to talk one-on-one with people, how you're using that from a programmatic perspective to target the right people. And then on the back-end side there, like Andrew was mentioning, on the cross-device piece. So being able to connect those things across your directed buys in a direct marketing fashion in an online world, and then experiencing where you can get incremental information that buys in and builds on that experience. We see the three primaries in this area right now are still Facebook, Google, and Twitter, but those primaries are starting to extend themselves out. You look at what Facebook's doing with Atlas. They acquired Atlas about a year or so ago, and about 6 weeks ago, they announced the ability to take your Facebook first-party data, incorporate that in through Atlas, and actually use it in your programmatic buying on properties outside of Facebook. So the dramatic benefit that we've seen to first-party data from Facebook and paid social is now able to be extended out into programmatic directed display. Google's been doing the same thing on the DoubleClick platform for a while now, and they've started to create more what they call in-market audience views. So they can tell you if somebody's starting to research vacation packages. They can tell you if somebody's starting to look for information across search, across email, across display that relates to their upcoming travel experiences, or more importantly, on the back end of that, what they've done as a result of it. And then Twitter certainly focusing much more with the acquisition of MoPub on the mobile side of that equation, because it services a particular niche and need. Everybody in this space knows and understands that there's a difference between a person on a mobile device that needs something immediately versus a person on a desktop that needs something potentially 6 or 8 months from now. And what these platforms are giving you is the ability to learn and understand about that context, and we'll talk a little bit more about how that relates into the overall experience. But the way that we see this lens is developing in a very consistent pattern in association to what we saw from direct mail 20, 25 years ago into phone progression and teleconferencing centers and inbound and outbound phone information. Email as a platform, when it first came into being, and before the abusive nature of kind of the spam laws coming into play. But now we're moving where we see it on the 4 and 5.0 side of addressability, to the right side of this scale, of starting to understand every time we interact with somebody online at a point where we're delivering advertising or at a point where they're pulling advertising to them, how we can start to change that experience because of the platforms that we're seeing. And you look at these platforms then and you say, okay, so I know about the top layer here. I know about the mature marketplaces. We've been using those for years. I also know about the scaling platforms. We're starting to test in those. A lot of people are starting to evaluate where those are working for their business, where they fit into the life cycle, whether it's a shareable content on social network versus a pushed paid media on a social network. But really, you start to look at the emerging platforms and start to understand that we really can get a holistic view of what a customer is doing along that path. Places like Walmart, places like Amazon that are creating third-party platforms now where they can take their first-party buyer data and tell you the types of things people are buying, which indicates preference, which indicates luxury desire versus cost efficiency desires, things like that. The important part of this, though, is starting to connect it in the bottom side of this, and Andrew mentioned our affinity for data. I think this industry in particular has an affinity for data because it's all about the things that influence choice. And you start to connect those pieces on what we would consider your addressable platforms, whether that be a point of sale system that exists at the, at the front desk on the registration side, or we work with some amusement parks where they've got POS systems that run and integrate personalized experiences throughout an amusement park. Disney's putting a lot of dollars into that effort. Connecting those same experiences online and offline through your website and your call center. And the ability to do that, really kind of progressing in from a data infrastructure piece, I think we see the majority of people pushing on the outbound side. So everybody's starting to use these things for targeting. You use your first-party data, your CRM database, your third-party data to identify where to deliver ads. And I know we've heard a lot of that throughout the conference over the last couple of days of, well, we're going to be able to use what Blue Kai's telling us, or we're going to use what this other data acquisition platform has told us about these people for outbound targeting. Where we see the real benefit and the driving change in this industry is starting to pull data from people's interactions, building that event stream like Andrew was mentioning, and starting to understand they started at X, they moved to Y, they ended at Z, and then the next thing they needed started at A. So the big question is, how do you do that? And we see the ability to do that through a series of lenses that kind of focus in on, identity management at the top end of this, which for the offline people has always been about associating transactional information to households. In this environment, it starts to associate those same transactional pieces at the device level, at the online persona level, and most importantly at the audience level. And then as you move around kind of this circle, and I'm not going to go into everything because we'll deal with it in different subsets of the conversation here, but the personalization of the experience and the platforms that you're utilizing to create that personalization become important once you start to understand identity. But none of that really works if you don't have the ability to start to service it and optimize against it over in the right-hand side of the media optimization spectrum here. I think the other thing is, I've always viewed addressability as a great way to identify who you're talking to, but the point of what you're talking to them about has always been a struggle. Whether that's in the travel industry, it's in a different industry on the vertical side, in retail or in insurance or wherever it is, you deal with 3 C's in this experience. So one is context. So the context in our view is, why is somebody where they are? What's the question they're asking you? What are they trying to get you to provide? Andrew mentioned the idea of content marketing. Content marketing is driven out of this concept of, I'm looking for a particular need state today, and I need you to service that to me, and people are starting to recognize that they have to start to build content that supports that. The content supporting it is great though, and I think a lot of companies have gone down this path of building out that content piece, but what has been missing is the ability to understand when the content is highly relevant, what content to serve. You've now got hundreds, if not thousands, of points of assets that you can communicate back to somebody, but you don't have the ability to start to see where those things come together. We see that last piece as kind of a critical component to the success in this factor of connectivity. So being able to say, I know and understand how somebody is moving through this path, what they're doing, what their actions indicate that they may want to see next, what assets I have that might service that. And you start to look at that and say, okay, how do I plan around those things? And in our view, the planning process starts to evaluate more at the audience level versus the media level. And I think this is a dramatic shift. We've been planning media for decades on, here's how many dollars we put in this channel, here's how many dollars we put in this channel, here's how many dollars we put over here. What we really believe you should be doing at this stage with addressable media, you have the ability to say, I've got 15 different segments of audiences. I'm going to plot this many dollars against segment 1 because segment 1 has this value to me. And now I need to build an addressable media plan that pays off against that segment and gets measured against the value of that segment. It requires a different planning process. It requires you to start off and say, what do I know? What do I understand? What's that context look like? And then work your way through the briefing process to say, I now know what my strategy is from my audience view, and then how I'm going to service that audience view through the media I'm going to buy and deliver. It works its way all the way back into optimization at that point. The thing I'll also ground you in, though, is that It doesn't change your overall process. It just re-emphasizes the point of looking at the audience first and managing the process through the audience view as opposed to the media view. So you still have insights, you still have a briefing process, you still have an execution process. It's just in this environment, instead of it starting where your display agency goes out and does their own insight and their own brief and their own execution, and then your search agency does the same thing, and your email agency does the same thing, and your direct mail agency does the same thing, and then your TV people, well, we don't know what the heck they do. They just come up with something and go create it. But the idea here is you start with the audience and then you build on the story you want to tell them. You still use the same process, but you start to use the points of context in the discussion of what we knew about them before. And this is all information that I'm sure everybody has in your customer database right now. But taking the ability then to connect your database to these other first-party data sources. And we view Facebook in this example that we're showing you here as a first-party data source. I'm connected to it, I'm volunteering the information, I'm telling Facebook what it is that I have and what I know and what I want to do. And then Facebook's sharing that information back to us as a first-party advertiser to be able to come in and say, hey, I can now tell you not only age, gender, and lifestyle and all those things up above, but I can tell you how frequently they access the internet on their mobile device. I can tell you how frequently they access it on a tablet. I can tell you a device unification ID that runs across those different devices. I can tell you what cities they've been in, what countries they've been in, what languages they speak, the types of friends they have. I can tell you where they purchase their products in the offline world from a retail perspective. I can tell you the insurances that they buy. All those different factors and characteristics that are readily volunteered by your audience to people like Facebook that many people in this environment are currently not engaging with. As you look at the next piece then, there we go. Sorry. There we go. That's all well and good, but if you're delivering the same message every time you know these things and you're delivering that same experience and you're coming in and saying, hey, I know who you are and I really want you to buy my product, here's the package I want you to buy, here's the destination I want you to go to. Every time they say, how do I plan for a family vacation in 2015? Well, that's not an answer to the question I'm asking. You start to see things like what Virgin's doing here, where they take into account all those pieces of context of if you're opening an email, it looks different when you open it on a mobile device versus when you open it on a desktop device. If you look at the distribution points of their website, they've got a responsive design website that in the bottom section here really dramatically changes from an experience perspective. If I'm a traveler on the go and I've already got a reservation, I come into the system, it's dynamically giving me all the points of information about where my flight is, where my plane's coming from, what it's doing. Those are all critical aspects to creating a better experience for me as a traveler, and those are critical aspects as I look at this entire space where, it's designed around the audience that's best served to drive revenue for their business. It's not designed around the least common denominator or the thing that'll get broken the least or the thing that's going to drive the highest top line revenue. It's more designed around what's going to drive the marginal revenue. So what does that give us? It gives us the ability to see all these points of context in this stream, and so we see segment and we see life cycle and we see timing and frequency and platform. And then on the other side, we've got all our content that we've now built because we know all the questions we want to ask. And I always refer to this kind of like the butterfly effect here, though, is as a traveler, as somebody that's buying vacation packages, as somebody that's experiencing your properties, I'm actually starting way over on the right-hand side here with the final destination of the journey that I drove. But it's critically important that you understand, I said I, because I'm an individual and I'm going to define my own path through this process. And in order to understand and serve that, you've got to have the ability to connect those dots. Because every person that's going to come in and experience this with you, every person that's going to plan a vacation, every person that's going to select a destination, select a hotel, select a rental car, select a provider, is going to pick which way they want to do that their own way. So as we go back and we start talking about the planning process at the media planning side of this equation on the front end and the experience planning side of this equation, what you have to be confident and understand there is we can lay out a 15-point journey that we want to achieve. No customer's ever going to follow that journey. They're going to define their own path. And as they define that path, your job as an advertiser and our job as a marketer is to figure out a way that we make sure we're customizing that path. There are literally millions of points of journeys that people are going to experience coming through to buy your product set. The question that this tends to answer is, how are you going to make sure that you're understanding and emphasizing the right points in that journey? So with that, I'll pass off to Shirley, who's going to tell you how to make sure that it works.
So there's a lot of data and a lot of information that we get as an organization. There's individual behaviors, where someone has traveled to, when they booked, what their book to travel window is, what channels they booked through, what they did before they actually booked, online versus offline sales information, competitive information, what segment they're in, what part of the funnel they're in. Are they intent or awareness, or are they really ready to make a booking? And then obviously there's information around them like lifetime value. So really what we want to do is we want to be able to take all of that information and make the best decisions on how to actually market and communicate to every individual in a personalized way. So it would be really great if we had a super duper optimizer that could help us do that, but in reality it doesn't really exist. So what we have is a tech stack that really supports the addressable customer experience, both online and offline. And just at a very high level, we have a foundational marketing database, and then we've got identity management, an insights platform, a DMP, and then you've got media and channel execution kind of sitting on top of all of that. But what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to integrate all of the different touch points of a customer and information about a customer into one overall customer view. So what we're trying to do is take all of that customer data and take all of that media data and media usage and consumption and what people are doing online and offline, and take the channel information and what I've actually done to market to them and how they've responded to it, and really group it all together for one uniform view of the customer. What that allows us to do is really get a true view of that customer and their behavior and what their interests are and how to really approach them in the most impactful way. And then it allows us to actually know from an attribution standpoint what works best for them and what every individual touch point that I sent as a marketer is actually doing to influence. And not necessarily influence conversion, but influence different parts of the funnel as well. So if we have somebody who is kind of at the top of the funnel and we're really in the awareness stage and we're trying to get them to be more of an intender, then have KPIs around that really drive, okay, did I manage to make them move down the funnel? All of this really requires identity management. And traditionally, when we talk about identity management, we talk about name and address. And we talk about, especially in the travel industry, very traditionally, we talk about name and address or potentially householding, right? But then it gets a lot more complex than that. What if somebody is making a booking as they're walking through the airport on their mobile phone? Or what if somebody is sitting at home, husband and wife at home on their iPad trying to figure out where to take their next vacation? Or what if somebody is sitting at work on their laptop and really trying to research options for them? All of a sudden, device IDs and device ID management becomes critically important because you want to understand that people are doing what people are doing across all of their different devices. And then finally, we've got digital identity. So people are going to be on different browsers and on different sites and using different cookies, and we've all heard about all of these different cookies, and really, how do you integrate all of that? So how do you know that the person that is viewing a page and clicking on a display ad and has gotten a direct mail at home are all the same people on different devices? There's no one answer or one company that can do all of that for us at the same time. So really, there's different companies that focus and are experts on different parts of this. And the idea is to really be able to integrate all of these things together to have one overall view. So that's where the DMP comes in. And obviously, a lot of you know what a DMP is and have DMPs or are working with DMPs. But traditionally, especially in the travel industry, what we have with DMPs is the third-party cookie data. So you have ideas of segments or lookalikes or cookies that you think are the most valuable. The DMP executes and puts display or media in front of them, and then you get that information back and you understand who's doing what. But the really Is that better? Okay. So the idea then is to really be able to also take the first-party data and integrate that into the DMP as well. And what that will allow us to do, like I said before, is really understand if somebody is in a household and somebody has, 2 children, or if somebody is an empty nester that's looking to take vacations at very different times with very different kind of purposes in mind, you want to be able to incorporate all of that data together. You want to know if that person has booked a travel vacation with you already in the past, or what do they book through? Do they generally book through OTAs, or do they book direct? And all of that information is critically important in the DMP when making decisions about how to talk to somebody, about what frequency. You want to be able to understand where they are in the funnel, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to take that third-party data that you already have traditionally in a DMP and also incorporating first-party data, both online and offline, gives a whole new way of really being able to talk to consumers in the right way. And then finally, we have the Insights platform. So what this really means is it really gives us a view of taking all of that information, the information from the marketing data marts and the information from the DMP and the information from offline and everything else, and integrating it into one usable space where you can really do several different things. The first is reporting and customized dashboards and really understanding in either near real time or real time what is happening and where your dollars are being spent and what is the ROI and what customers are doing. The second is really around insights. So from an attribution standpoint, understanding, is there a specific campaign or is there a specific drop that I had that was incredibly successful? What drove it? What is driving responses? What is driving conversion? And what is driving, again, these movements down the funnel? And then finally, there's this concept of an insights playground, which really is allowing analytics and analysts to have this kind of open space where they're looking at all of this integrated data that is both offline and online, and really bringing all of that together into. Do you want? Can you guys hear me? Okay. I think we're okay. So, and allowing analysts to be able to use all of that information and really gather insights and build models, and then going to the next slide, really being able to optimize on these things. So being able to automate model scoring in the database based on all of the behaviors that are happening in real time. Being able to directly execute on platforms from that insight platform and the metadata that it has to say, okay, well, these are the segments that I really want to go after, and these are the triggers and behaviors that really impact what I want to be sending and the type of frequency that I want to be sending and the messaging that I want to share. And then the last thing is creation of media plans. And what this means is being able to do scenario optimization and to play around and say, okay, well, if I've got an incremental budget, where do I spend it? Or if I need to cut my budget, where's the right place to cut it from? And being able to do all of these different scenarios and kind of play around and figure out what the right optimization is. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
All right, we're pretty much done. Just thought I might open up to questions. Your food is waiting for you just outside those doors. Anybody have any questions about any of the stuff that we talked about today? I'll start quizzing people. Identity management, I will do it.
I will get a question.
You in the front that's paid to be here.
Yeah. No, I think it's very interesting what Matt said about the concept of context budgeting instead of channel budgeting. So if you take, for instance, the typical context, if you divide by inspiration, planning, shopping, and booking, how would you go about doing that exercise of budgeting along this type of contexts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest way is as you look at the audience, you have to understand what are the typical critical paths, and you've got to build your budget in a way that allows it to dynamically change. And this is a challenge that a lot of companies have. Like, you know, when I say you plan around the audience and not around the media destination, that's the most difficult organizational thing that people run into. Because everybody says you've got $5 million to spend on display. Well, that's great, but if my best customers want to interact with me on search and email, why am I spending $5 million on display? I want to spend $10 million on search, but then I identify that the best way for me to get people at the top end of their consideration path and to deliver the right content is to actually run a content-targeted display program that runs off of Facebook's first-party data based on properties that they've followed. Well, then I should be able to put my budget there. So as you talk about how you budget and optimize, my recommendation for most places and what we tend to do is that the budget is, I want to spend this much money driving this audience. Now I've got to find out, my goal then as a marketer and as a strategic planner is to say, how do I get the ability to spend that much money by finding enough people to spend it on first? And once I've found the people to spend it on, where are the most influential points in that journey that I can actually effectively make change? And so it becomes much less about plotting it out in the beginning as it does looking at the funnel and saying, in the earlier stages of development of relationship, I've got to make sure that I appear around content that says I'm here to help. And then once I'm here to help you plan your vacation, once I'm here to help you plan your destination experience, how do I then turn that into a sale? And that's where your points of optimization come in.
And just to add one more thing to that, I think that a lot of the challenge becomes then what the right KPIs are. Because if you're looking at optimizing against certain segments and against certain life cycle segments and where people are in the funnel, then the KPI is not always going to be conversion. And a lot of times the optimization that happens within media spend is specifically around conversion. So that's a little bit of a mindset shift where if you have people where you're in the awareness stage where they're not even planning or ready to book or anything else, the KPI is not going to be conversion. The KPI is really about getting them to think about your brand specifically.
We have another question from you.
Yeah, Chris Adams with Miles. So let's talk briefly about, if it's possible, attribution. So a Millard Brown study which they did with Expedia and Compete highlighted that for the typical OTA booking, travelers had been to 38 different websites over a period of 5 to 6 weeks on average. And obviously for international long-haul travel, it can be a much more extended process. So did you have some practical tips about how you tackle the thorny issue of attribution and understanding which interactions are really influencing the path to purchase?
Yeah, absolutely. And just let me start out by saying that attribution is not, one size fits all, and it's really a more custom approach. And so the idea is to really look at all of the different campaigns over a lengthy period of time, and our approach is to actually build models and then have fractional attribution. So basically trying to understand the fractional amount that every single campaign is really influencing the overall end goal and what you're actually trying to attribute, whether it's conversion or something else. And so my personal recommendation is that it's a set of models that takes into account data that's not even just, I would take in any kind of data possible. So whether it's your spend and your campaigns, as well as anything that you can get from the competitive landscape that will also influence. Because what you really want to do is have a very bottoms-up approach to what that specific touch point actually did to influence conversion. And like you said, specifically in the OTA space, that's very complicated because of all the shopping that people do and the comparison shopping that people are doing. So anything that you can do to understand the competitive landscape as well and put that into the models is going to help to really try and understand.
So let me add on.
I was just going to add one thing about, we're talking about addressable experiences today, so that experience piece is what's sort of new to our story. In the attribution context, I think what's been mostly worked on and solved for, to the degree that Shirley just talked about, is the fractional attribution. So it's a understanding of the proper investment to be made at those different touches, and not giving all the credit to the last thing and spending all your money there and slamming the bus into the wall. I think the piece that, again, implications of addressable experiences are, what's the attribution associated with the message, right? So I think it's easier to connect a value for the media investment. What we're starting to work on through some of the things we talked about today is also understanding the attribution of the message and the context, which is harder.
So I'm going to add on my last, this is the strategist in me that's always going to come out against the analytics side of the equation as well. It's not against it, it's in support of a different view.
We're going to fight afterwards.
We're going to fight afterwards.
Time's up.
It's okay.
Time's up.
The one challenge I always see with attribution is people start with attribution before they do their planning. And I will guarantee you that if you've optimized every one of your programs around acquisition, when you do attribution, there won't be any, because you've inherently optimized against it. So when you look at the planning process as well, there's also an aspect of this that you've got to align the plan with a measurement approach, like what Shirley talked about, and that you're optimizing around the things that are designed to lead further down the funnel, and then your attribution actually starts to make sense. Because every company I've walked into with an attribution program in the last 5 years has said, you know, it's great, but it tells me there's no channel interaction between anything. And we all know that's garbage. You know, it tells you there's no channel interaction because you plotted this much in this media and this much in this media, and then you went and optimized that media to the last step of the funnel. You didn't build a plan that said, I want to design something to build a relationship and drive it through the funnel. So, love the analytics to support it, but I also say that there's a strategic approach to re-envisioning how attribution comes into play.
I think we need to wrap up. Thank you very much, Shirley, Matt, Andrew. Thank you very much. We have lunch across the corridor. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys.